The guest for this week's interview for Inbox 7 is Her Excellency the Ambassador Marriott Sherman, which has been appointed for NATO Special Representative for Women, Peace and Stability. Please explain what does being NATO Special Representative for Women, Peace and Stability means for your future career, and what are your expectations regarding your new function?
Well, my position in NATO will be to assist NATO in implementing what we call Resolution 1325 in their daily work. That means to integrate a gender perspective in their day-to-day business. In practical terms, that means that to promote or to assist them in assuring participation of women in peace operations, peacekeeping missions, but also in conflict resolution. And the other side of the agenda is to properly protect women, particularly against sexual violence in conflict. So it's a very large agenda, which basically NATO as an organization, but also NATO partner countries, including Macedonia, have committed themselves to. And my job is just to advise them and to assist them to do that as effective as possible.
Your new post in NATO means that you will deal, among other, with women issues. This is interesting since you have been publicly, so to speak, sexually harassed. Your response was citing Walter. Is that enough when a woman is being personally attacked?
Well, to me, I think the intent was not so much to sexually harass me. I think it was more an effort to try to discredit me for something I said in public. And my response, and also including, citing Voltaire, stressing basically the importance of freedom of speech, that I respect other people's freedom of speech, and that is my mission. That was also the message which triggered this reaction, this attack, or whatever you call it. Basically, my message was, I will not keeping up defending freedom of speech in this country, and whatever I said is not my personal opinion, so you can attack me or try to discredit me, but this is the position of the government of the Netherlands. This is, a government's position, a message that's for us the fundamental values that we share and that we expect also from countries that aspire to join EU and NATO to respect, are very important to us, and we're here to assist the Macedonian government and the Macedonian people to uphold those standards. So fundamental freedoms, fundamental rights are a core part of the values that we share.
Netherlands is known as one of the biggest donors in Macedonia, with donating more than 200 million euros in grants. On the other hand, you have been publicly attacked because of the support of independent media in Macedonia. How do you comment this?
To a certain extent, I think the attacks, if you want to call it that way, the criticism on our support to media, maybe just illustrated the fact that there is a need to support professionalization of media and diversification of the media landscape. And in our response, what we try to stress is that this is fully in line with the government's agenda, the agenda that the government has agreed with the journalists themselves, a general understanding that there's a need for more space for freedom of speech, and particularly freedom of media, and for professionalization of media and journalism. And this is the agenda we support. The other thing we've done is we're totally, fully transparent and accountable on what we do. Everything is online on our website and all our support programs, so citizens can just check the information themselves and see what we do.
In the past years, Netherlands has invested more than 40 million euros in the educational system in Macedonia. Are you satisfied with the changes that have been made?
Well, this support program was obviously completed before I arrived, so I don't have personal experience with the program. I know from people that were involved that indeed they were slightly disappointed with the impact of that. So if you look at the sustainability of the support to the education system, I admit that is questionable. But I think it also illustrates with reforms, and particularly reforms in fields like education and health, or public sector reforms, that it's not enough to invest in hardware, and it takes a long period to change, to make a structural change in systems and in way things operate and in attitudes. And that change will never come from outside, it will never come from donors. This is a matter of understanding and will of the people and their leaders. I think education is critical for every country. I think it's also recognized here largely that reforms in education and improvement in the quality of education and education outcomes are critical for the future of the country, but also for prosperity and economic growth. I know it's also clearly on the government's agenda. It's a concern that every citizen shares, basically. I hope that when probably next year or soon there will be initial outcomes of the PISA study that Macedonia now also took after 10 years again, which compares the quality of its education, secondary education, with neighboring countries and with other European countries, that will trigger really a national debate on what has to be done in order to further strengthen and increase the quality of education. And hopefully that will be a debate which is really national and not politicized. Mm-hmm. Because this is an important issue. It's not an issue that you can use for propaganda or party politics. This should really be a national debate. Education reforms are amongst the most difficult to realize. And they take more than 4 years. So let's say more than one government term. I know in the Netherlands, although we have a solid education system with well-trained teachers and a solid administration, even schools are struggling to keep up with all the new ideas and instruments that are sort of poured over them by policymakers. But I think what is the key importance, if we're really seriously about providing quality education to our children so that they can have a fulfilling life and be meaningful to the entire society, that it is depoliticized. And that has nothing to do with laptops, computers, and buildings in the end. I mean, education is done by teachers. It starts with quality teachers that are rewarded for professionalism. And I think that is the kind of quality, if you want to improve quality, that is where the quality starts, to have good teachers for our children and how to achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Have you recognized some kind of signs of politicization in the schools in previous years?
Well, I hear the same stories. I mean, people talk about this all day, isn't it? I mean, everyone who has a child in school is always concerned about the quality of the school your child is going to, and question marks how things are run. And I think it's very positive that also in Macedonia people are sincerely committed to education. People invest a lot in the education of their children, also relatively. So parents are committed, students know it's important for their future. I think it's very important to involve them in decision making and assist them in steering the decisions of when it comes to curricula, the way of educating children, to what extent you encourage them to become investigators, to look for information, to open their minds. I'm not an education specialist, but as a parent and as a person living, in Macedonia, talking about education with many, different people, as I said, it affects everybody. It's important to everybody. To a certain extent, it's an excellent topic, I think, also for, as I said, a national debate, because it does affect everybody. And it's just too important to become part of a partisan politics.
Freedom of the press in Macedonia is constantly being worsening, which has been notified by various international organizations. One of the last reports was the one of the Freedom House, which has rated Macedonia on the bottom of the scale in the region, according to the freedom of the press. Can you please tell us, do you agree with such gradings?
Well, generally speaking, I would be very cautious, with ratings and statistics, because it's very easy to lie with statistics. But if you look at the consistency amongst the different indicators when it comes to freedom of media, the consistency amongst them as well is a very long period in time, where we see over time, it's not a 1 year thing, we see degrading over the past years. where Macedonia now indeed, most indicators is for a European country and a country of Western Balkans is amongst the lowest in those ratings. That confirms the concerns that we have about freedom of media. But honestly, I don't think there's many people that would deny that there are issues. In the dialogue between the government and the journalists and media owners, it was not so much that people deny that there's a need to improve and to guarantee the space for freedom of speech and quality journalism, and an agenda has been set out. So I think it's more important to focus, on the way ahead and how to address this issue than to just sort of blindly trying to target indices. There's a general understanding that when it comes to free media, that it's critical to have free media for functioning democracy, and that there is room for improvement. So let's just make sure that we improve. I think it's not so much up to me to say what my personal opinion on this is, but as I said, the journalists with the government came to a roadmap, and all these issues are there. Government funding of media, transparency of government funding of media, both through advertisement but also through the financing of the public service, is definitely a key issue of concern that is very high on the agenda to be addressed. There's other mechanisms that may lead to self-censorship, which also have to be addressed. But as I said, the agenda is rather clear, and there was a general understanding of what needs to be done. Government advertising is one thing, which definitely is critical. Self-regulation in order to improve professional standards and to reward professional behavior is another issue that the journalists themselves are very actively working on now. I think that has to be commended. There's a commendable efforts by the journalists themselves to set their own standards and a code of ethics and a system to basically hold each other to account. So there's several initiatives in addition to, let's say, the first step, which was defamation, the decriminalization of defamation as a first step. So there's an agenda which is there, and I think it's important to restart a dialogue on that agenda and to follow that agenda. I think we all know what the issues are, we just have to address them.
Recently, a delegation from Belgium, Netherlands and Luxembourg, which visited Macedonia, expressed their concerns about the stagnation and regression in the fields of political dialogue, rule of law and basic rights and freedom. What was their opinion based on?
Well, it was a fact-finding mission, a collective fact-finding mission. Their conclusions that they released on the last day of their mission were based on the meetings and the conversations they had with a host of counterparts, so both government, political parties, civil society, academia, diplomats, international organizations. So it's their conclusion from many meetings that we had during those 3 days. No, they didn't come with specific recommendations. Obviously, they shared, let's say, our government's point of view, our concerns, issues that we feel that we would like to see addressed, and the government officials expressed what they were doing and explained what they were doing, etc. But in the press release, the statement that they released at the end of their mission, as you said, they clearly expressed the concerns that we feel that should be addressed. I think it's an important message that European member states did not forget about Macedonia. They deliberately chose to come and visit this country and not any of the neighboring countries, to have, first-hand information, to talk to people themselves before we, in the end, also in Brussels, we'll discuss progress reports, etc., etc. But to base our assessment on what is going on and what needs to be done on our own first-hand information and impression. So from that perspective, I think it was a very useful visit, also to make sure that Macedonia stays on the agenda of the international community and particularly of the European Union.
Macedonia is expecting the new EU progress report. Last year, the remarks were concerning independence of judiciary, bad economic situation and unemployment, as well as worsening of the freedom of expression and freedom of the press. What are your expectations regarding this year's report?
I think it's important to stress, as we always say, we don't know what's in the report. The report is written by the European Commission, and also the member states don't know what's in there until the report is released in October. I think the date is 8th of October. It will first be presented to government here, and then to the public. So I don't know what is in the report. I do know that the Commission tries to be as objective as possible in basically providing a mirror on where Macedonia stands on all the different issues of legislation and systems that need to be aligned to the European Union. So how far are you on the way to Europe in terms of institutions? And in addition, there will be an assessment by the Commission on to what extent Macedonia continues to fulfill the basic criteria for starting accession negotiations. So there's always those two components. I think that the issues of attention, they will be the same. The Commission has said, and the strategy, enlargement strategy, has refocused on fundamentals, and those fundamentals are the political and economic criteria. The fundamentals are respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, rule of law, independent media. So for sure those issues will be emphasized in addition to the functioning of the market economy. Those are the fundamentals of the EU community, and those will be the key issues of concern, of focus, also of the new progress report.
Your Excellency, there has been opposition boycott since the new parliament has been established, and it seems like this political crisis will continue. What is your comment on this, and how do you think that it will reflect on the country's progress?
Well, I never commented on any decision, on a decision to boycott or not to boycott. But the bottom line, I think, is that this sort of protracted political crisis that we see, let's say, basically from the 24th of December 2012, a breakdown of trust between political parties, political leaders, and a lack of dialogue, of political dialogue. That is a reason for concern. So we continue to call on all parties, on all sides of the political spectrum, to keep the national interest in focus and not the party interest. So to put the national interest first, which basically means to engage, to try to find a solution, to engage in dialogue, and to try to restore the trust of citizens in the functioning of a parliamentary democracy. And that is an obligation on all sides. Both opposition and government. For the government to get the opposition back in parliament, and for the opposition to do justice to the people that voted for them and that they represent. Because in the end, everybody has to be represented in a representative parliament. So this is the issue, the point that we stress. We call on all people that carry a responsibility to take that responsibility and to do whatever they can to find a solution and to restore the dialogue and to restore the trust in a functioning parliamentary democracy.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that how do you think this will basically reflect on the future if this continues as it is at the moment?
That is very difficult to predict. Because it will. It's impossible. It's not difficult, impossible to predict. I don't want to keep a sort of worst case scenario in mind that this thing can never be solved. Honestly, I trust in the sense of responsibility and the understanding of the urgency to solve this of the political leadership in this country. On behalf of their citizens, that in the end they will find a solution and understand the importance of this, to agree on what needs to be done, to address the concerns when it comes to both the electoral process, free and fair elections, the functioning of parliament, so that in the end the voice of the people is heard, because that is what democracy is about, so that people can fully participate in the decision making in their country. So that is basically my hope. And honestly, I'm actually convinced that the understanding is there and the political will on all sides is there to bite the bitter bullet and to sit and solve the issue.
Lately, the most interesting topic in the public is the placing of the 5 new monuments in the center of Skopje, which has raised many questions about the validity of these monuments and their backgrounds. How does Netherlands see the project Skopje 2014 and the new look of the capital of Macedonia, which has been a subject for dispute in the past few years?
It's not up to us to have an opinion on the aesthetics of the monuments or the storyline, basically, of the monuments. One can wonder why the project continues apparently beyond 2014, where it's controversial. There's many controversies. And there seemed to be a bit of fatigue on the side of the citizens. But I think the key issue is really, the key concern is the lack of transparency about the resources that have been used for the project, lack of transparency and accountability over those resources in a country which has a very small economy and a very small state budget. So I think there's a legitimate concern of citizens, not only in Skopje, but also citizens living in other cities, when it comes to asking the question, what happened to my tax money? You can only spend your dollar or your euro or your dinar once. And as I said, spending taxpayers' money on non-productive investments, which in the long term don't contribute to economic growth and more prosperity, is a legitimate. I mean, citizens, I think, rightfully ask the questions if there couldn't have been more productive investments. So I think that is the key issue, the issue of transparency and accountability, and a discussion on how to allocate public resources.
Your Excellency, you probably have been personally disturbed by the fact that most of the passengers in the Malaysian plane that crashed in eastern Ukraine in July were Dutch citizens. Can you please share your concerns with us?
Well, it was indeed for the Netherlands a particularly tragic accident, which has come as a big shock. It sincerely affected the Dutch society and probably also affected the political views on the crisis that's ongoing within Europe, and particularly the crisis around Ukraine. But the position of my government, which is broadly supported by the population, is first to find the facts, to establish the facts before pinpointing anywhere, to retrieve the bodies and their belongings, so to have access to the crash site for these two purposes, and then for justice to be done. So these are our highest priorities, and the government of the Netherlands, we stick to those. An initial report was released by an investigative unit, which is not a criminal investigation, but establishing the fact. That report has been made public last year, and it will probably take another year before the final report will come out on what exactly caused this incident. And that is the first step. So far, what we encourage, we call on all parties to de-escalate and to ensure that we have safe access to the crash site, so that we can continue to retrieve the bodies of the deceased and give them back to their family members, their beloved ones, with their belongings as well. So that continues to be, I think, our priority number one.
Your Excellency, thank you for this interview, and I wish you luck in your future career. This was the interview with Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Netherlands in Macedonia, Ms. Marriott Schurman.